Preamble. Hello and welcome to the International Explainer. I am your host, and this is our very first video on a channel dedicated to daily analysis of the most controversial news stories around the world. Every day, we will take an in-depth look at the topics making headlines on your TV screens, in your newspapers, and on your social media feeds, with the aim of providing an objective explanation of the bigger picture. Subscribe and like us so you do not miss out on the next news stories explained. In order to avoid using photos that I do not own the rights to, the images are generated by artificial intelligence that adapts the image to a sentence rather than the context. But the important thing is not the images, but the content. All sources are listed in the description of this video. Today, we are tackling a hot button issue, the Freedom Flotilla 2025. We will explore why figures like Greta Thunberg and a member of the European Parliament are defying the Gaza blockade. What are the motivations? Who are the key players? And what are the potential repercussions of this highly charged event? Let us break it down. Freedom Flotilla 2025. When Greta Thunberg and an MEP defy the Gaza blockade. On June 1st, 2025, a small ship named Madleen left the Italian coast with 12 people on board, determined to break one of the most controversial blockades of our time. Among them, Greta Thunberg, the 21-year-old climate icon, and Rima Hassan, the first Franco-Palestinian MEP. Their mission is to bring humanitarian aid to Gaza and challenge what they call an ongoing genocide. This new Freedom Flotilla revives an international debate that has divided the world for 15 years. Part 1. Introduction. Imagine 2.1 million people trapped in a territory twice the size of Paris, deprived since March 2025 of all humanitarian aid, electricity, drinking water, and sufficient food. This is the reality in Gaza today, and it is precisely against this situation that the Madleen is sailing towards the Palestinian coast. But to understand why this mission is making the world's chancelleries tremble, we need to go back 15 years, to the day when everything turned upside down. Part 2. The bloody legacy of the Mavi Marmara. On May 31st, 2010, at 4:26 a.m., Israeli naval commandos attacked a flotilla of 6 ships carrying 718 peace activists and 10,000 tons of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The operation, carried out 72 nautical miles off the coast in international waters, turns into a massacre. 10 Turkish activists are killed, including a 19-year-old American-Turkish teenager, Furkan Doğan, shot 5 times. The images shocked the world. We only had bladed weapons, chairs and fire hoses to defend ourselves, testifies Hanan Zoabi, an Arab-Israeli MP who was on board. They fired live ammunition before we even got on the boat. The UN investigation would later conclude that Israel had used excessive and unreasonable force against unarmed civilians in international waters. The Mavi Marmara incident marks the official birth of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, an international alliance of NGOs determined to break Israel's naval blockade of Gaza. For 15 years, this coalition has organized regular missions, almost all of which were intercepted by the Israeli Navy, but which maintain constant diplomatic pressure on Israel. Part 3. The evolution of a resistance movement. Since 2010, the Freedom Flotilla Coalition has organized dozens of missions with evolving tactics. In the early years, they sent out large flotillas with several ships and hundreds of participants. Today, they favor smaller but more media-impactful missions, like the one in 2016 with a women's boat carrying only feminist activists, or the one in 2025 with Greta Thunberg. The objective remains the same: to defy the Israeli naval blockade, which the international community widely regards as collective punishment in violation of international law. Each mission is an act of civil disobedience, not violent, explains Ehab Lotayev, the coalition's Canadian coordinator. We are not looking for confrontation, we are looking to enforce international maritime law. Part 4, Gaza 2025, Hell on Earth. To understand the urgency that drove Greta Thunberg and Rima Hassan to risk their lives at sea, we need to grasp the scale of the humanitarian catastrophe that has been unfolding in Gaza since October 2023. The figures are staggering. Part 5, a region cut off from the rest of the world. Since March 2nd, 2025, Israel has imposed a total blockade on Gaza, the longest in history, according to experts. No humanitarian aid, commercial goods or fuel are allowed into the territory. This is unprecedented, even during the most tense periods of the last 15 years. The consequences are catastrophic. Of the 2.3 million inhabitants before October 2023, only around 2.1 million remain. 160,000 have left the country or are presumed dead, including 55,000 confirmed dead and 11,000 missing under the rubble. Nearly 1 million children now live in Gaza in conditions that the UN describes as apocalyptic. Electricity has been cut off since October 2023. Drinking water is in desperate short supply. 96% of the water available was already undrinkable before the crisis, and now desalination plants are operating at only 15% of capacity. People are drinking contaminated water or simply cannot find enough. Part 6, the coming famine. Most terrifying of all, hunger is taking hold. 470,000 people, or 22% of the population, are now living in a situation of catastrophic famine, according to the international classification. More than 1 million others are in a food emergency. Since March, 57 children have officially died of malnutrition. My patients arrive with emaciated bodies that I have never seen, even in the worst moments of Gaza, testifies Dr. Hassan Abu Safia, director of Kamal Adwan Hospital in the north of the Strip. Mothers no longer have milk for their babies. Children have the faces of old men. The health system has collapsed. Of 36 hospitals, only 19 are still functioning, often without electricity or medicines. 886 healthcare workers have been killed since October 2023, a dramatic record that the World Health Organization describes as a war on healthcare. Part 7, Greta, from ecology to revolution. Greta Thunberg's presence on the Madleen surprised many of her former supporters. How did the young Swede, who mobilized millions of teenagers for the climate, end up sailing to Gaza with a Palestinian flag? Part 8, assumed radicalization. Greta Thunberg's transformation. Since 2023 has been spectacular. The woman who carefully avoided political issues other than climate change now advertises herself as decolonial, anti-capitalist, and anti-fascist. In October 2024, at a rally in Milan, she declared, "If you are a climate activist, but you are not also fighting for a free Palestine and an end to colonialism in the world, then you cannot call yourself a climate activist." This development deeply divides her former supporters. In Germany, the authorities have banned her from demonstrations and accuse her of being ready to use violence. In the United States, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham ironically tweeted about the Flotilla, "I hope Greta and her friends can swim." But Thunberg fully embraces this shift. "You cannot have climate justice without social justice," she explains. "It does not matter whether suffering comes from CO2, bombs, or state repression. We have to stand up against all sources of suffering." For her, Gaza represents the perfect intersection between climate justice and social justice. What we call normal is an extreme system based on the exploitation of people and the planet, she says. Gaza shows this system in the extreme. People deprived of water, food, electricity for purely political reasons. Part 9, a new generation of activists. Greta Thunberg's radicalization reflects a broader phenomenon among young activists in the West. On TikTok and Instagram, the Palestinian cause has exploded among 15 to 25-year-olds, with billions of views for the hashtags Free Palestine and Gaza under attack. For many young people, Palestine has become the symbol of all struggles against oppression. My generation grew up seeing videos of Palestinian children killed by Western weapons, explains Clara, a 17-year-old climate activist from Paris. You cannot fight against the destruction of the planet and ignore the destruction of the Palestinians. It is the same system of domination. Part 10, Rima Hassan, from refugee camp to European Parliament. At the age of 32, Rima Hassan embodies an extraordinary trajectory. Born stateless in 1992 in the Nairobi refugee camp in Syria, she is today the first Franco-Palestinian MEP and one of the most listened to voices on the Palestinian question in Europe. Part 11, A Childhood in Exile. Rima Hassan's parents fled Palestine in 1948 during what Palestinians call the Nakba, catastrophe in Arabic. Like 750,000 other Palestinians, they found themselves refugees, first in Lebanon and then in Syria. Rima was born in the Nairab camp, near Aleppo, and spent her first 9 years there. In the camp, we lived with the hope of returning, she recounts. My grandparents treasured the keys to their house in Palestine, convinced that they would return one day. This childhood deeply marked her political vision. For her, the Palestinian question is not a conflict between two peoples, but a question of justice and international law. Arriving in France at the age of 9, she obtained French nationality at 18 and studied international law. Her master's thesis compares South African apartheid and the situation in Palestine in legal terms, an analysis that still shapes her political positions today. Part 12, A Voice That Disturbs. Elected in 2024 on the LA France Insoumise list, Rima Hassan does not mince her words. She calls Israel an unspeakable monster and a fascist colonial entity. These statements have led to her being prosecuted in France for apology to terrorism and banned from entering Israel. In February 2025, when she was due to take part in an official delegation from the European Parliament, Israel refused her entry to its territory. An unacceptable decision that undermines European autonomy, she denounces. The incident provokes a diplomatic crisis between Brussels and Jerusalem. On the Madleen, Rima Hassan explains her presence. I am on board because silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. The Palestinian people of Gaza are starving and being massacred, and the world is watching. This boat carries not only aid but also a demand. Stop the blockade, stop the genocide. Part 13, The World Divided Over the Flotilla. Madleen's mission reveals the deep rifts running through the international community on the Palestinian question. Rarely has a conflict so polarized world opinion. Part 14, Europe in Disarray. Within the European Union, positions diverge dramatically. 17 of the 27 foreign ministers voted in favor of revising the EU-Israel Association Agreement because of human rights violations. But countries like Germany and the Czech Republic remain firm in their support for Israel. France finds itself in a particularly delicate position with Rima Hassan. Some French politicians are calling for her nationality to be withdrawn for her positions, while others are defending her in the name of freedom of expression. She represents a part of France that refuses to remain silent in the face of injustice, defends MP Mathilde Panot. The Netherlands and Ireland are leading the European charge against the blockade, calling it a clear violation of international humanitarian law. 7 European countries have jointly called for an end to the Israeli military aggression. Part 15, The United States Embarrassed. Even the United States, Israel's traditional ally, is showing signs of unease. Donald Trump, though reputedly pro-Israel, surprised by declaring in January 2025, Gaza came up in our discussions and I said, we have to be good to Gaza. These people are suffering. American public opinion is changing rapidly, especially among young people. 53% of Americans now have an unfavorable opinion of Israel, compared with 42% in 2022. Among 18 to 29-year-olds, the proportion rises to 65%. TikTok has changed the game, analyses Sarah Leah Whitson, Director of Democracy for the Arab World Now. This generation sees images of Gaza directly, without the filter of traditional media. Part 16, the Global South Mobilized. In the countries of the South, support for Palestine is massive. 137 of the 193 UN member states have voted to refer Israel's obligations to the International Court of Justice. Demonstrations in support of the Flotillas take place from Brazil to Indonesia. For us, Palestine represents all the struggles of decolonization, explains Nalini Milani, a committed Indian artist. It is our collective history in the face of colonial powers. Part 17, Israel, the total blockade strategy. Faced with growing international pressure, Israel has chosen to harden its stance. Since March 2025, the Netanyahu government has applied an unprecedented total blockade on Gaza. Part 18, no humanitarian aid as long as there are hostages. Defense Minister Israel Katz has made it clear. No humanitarian aid will enter Gaza until the 58 Israeli hostages are released. This policy marks a break with previous crises, when Israel always allowed a minimum of humanitarian aid. We are using hunger as a weapon of war to put pressure on Hamas, privately admits an Israeli military official quoted by the Haaretz newspaper. It is hard to say, but it's effective. This strategy is drawing criticism even in Israel. Former Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot denounced a moral and strategic error that tarnishes Israel's image in the world. Several Israeli humanitarian organizations are trying to end the blockade through legal action. Part 19, fear of flotillas. Why does Israel react so violently to the flotillas? Because they challenge our control of territorial waters, explains an Israeli military analyst on condition of anonymity. If we let a flotilla through, we lose the credibility of our blockade. On May 2nd, 2025, a drone attack on the ship Conscience in international waters near Malta marked an escalation. Although Israel has not claimed responsibility for the attack, all indications point to Israeli intelligence. It is a clear message: we will strike even outside our territorial waters, analyzes Israeli security expert Ronan Bergman. Part 20, social networks, the new battlefield. The war in Gaza is also being played out on our phones. TikTok, Instagram, X are informational battlefields where Palestinian and Israeli narratives clash. Part 21, the TikTok revolution. For the first time in a conflict, young Palestinians in Gaza were able to give direct testimony of their daily lives via TikTok. Millions of teenagers around the world discovered the Palestinian reality without the traditional media filter. Plestia Alakad, 20 years old, a student from Gaza who became an influencer in spite of herself with 1.8 million followers, films her daily life under the bombs. "I just show my reality," she says. "People understand better than through the newspapers." Her videos, viewed tens of millions of times, have touched an entire generation. This Palestinian digital diplomacy has profoundly influenced the opinion of young Westerners. In Europe, 65% of 18 to 25-year-olds support the Palestinian cause, compared with 35% of those over 65, according to a 2024 Ipsos poll. Part 22, information warfare. Faced with this growing Palestinian influence, Israel has developed a veritable digital army. The government uses artificial intelligence to generate pro-Israeli content and bot farms to amplify certain messages. According to an investigation by The Guardian, Israel spends over $100 million a year on digital diplomacy, employing thousands of people to influence opinion online. It is a war for hearts and minds being played out on our screens. Analyses Sander van der Linden, a disinformation expert at Cambridge University. Meta is facing accusations of pro-Palestinian censorship. Some of the company's employees have even filed an internal lawsuit, accusing their management of deleting Palestinian content. There is clearly a pro-Israeli bias in the algorithms, denounces Mona Steyer, a former Meta employee turned whistleblower. Part 23, International Law put to the test. At the heart of the Freedom Flotilla debate is a fundamental legal question. Is the blockade of Gaza legal under international law? Part 24, an overwhelming legal consensus. The experts' answer is loud and clear, no. The UN, the International Red Cross, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and virtually all human rights organizations consider the blockade to be collective punishment prohibited by the Geneva Conventions. Punishing an entire population for the actions of some constitutes a war crime, explains William Shabbos, former chairman of the UN Gaza Board of Inquiry and professor of international law. The blockade deprives 2.3 million civilians of their vital needs. It is legally indefensible. In January 2024, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to immediately facilitate humanitarian access to Gaza. This binding ruling has never been implemented. Quite the contrary, the blockade has since hardened. Part 25, the powerlessness of international law. This situation reveals the limitations of the international legal system. We have laws, we have courts, but we do not have an international police force, sums up Balakrishnan Rajagopal, UN Special Rapporteur on Housing Rights. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defense Minister for war crimes and using famine as a weapon of war. But these warrants can only be executed if the leaders travel to a country that recognizes the ICC. That is exactly why we sail, explains Greta Thunberg from the Madleen. When international law is not respected, civil disobedience becomes a moral duty. Part 26, Gaza in a multipolar world. The Gaza crisis also reveals the profound geopolitical transformations of our times. We are witnessing the emergence of a multipolar world where Western hegemony is increasingly challenged. Part 27, the West divided. For the first time since 1945, the Western allies are deeply divided over a major crisis. While the United States maintains its support for Israel, Europe is gradually distancing itself from it. This divide is considerably weakening Western influence on the international stage. Gaza marks the end of Atlantic unity, analyzes Bertrand Beatty, a specialist in international relations. Europe is discovering that it no longer shares the same values as the United States when it comes to human rights. This division benefits the emerging powers. China and Russia are skillfully exploiting these Western contradictions to promote their vision of an alternative international order. The West talks about human rights but supports the massacre in Gaza. Chinese diplomacy regularly denounces. Part 28. The Global South gets organized. The countries of the Global South are increasingly rallying around the Palestinian cause. South Africa, drawing on its experience of apartheid, is leading the legal charge against Israel before the ICC. Gaza awakens the collective memory of colonized peoples, explains Cameroonian philosopher Akili Mbembe. For us, Palestine represents all our struggles for independence and dignity. This solidarity from the Global South is changing the diplomatic landscape. At the United Nations, pro-Palestinian resolutions now win overwhelming majorities, increasingly isolating Israel and its Western backers. Part 29, the uncertain future of a symbolic mission. As the Madleen continues its journey to Gaza, its fate remains uncertain. According to international maritime law, the ship is sailing in international waters, and has the right to continue its humanitarian mission. But the history of previous flotillas shows that Israel does not hesitate to violate this right. Part 30. Possible scenarios. There are 3 possible scenarios for the current mission. The first, interception by the Israeli Navy, as has happened with all previous flotillas. The 12 activists would then be arrested, held for a few days, and then deported. This is the most likely scenario, according to the experts. The second scenario, a more violent attack, like the one on the Mavi Marmara in 2010, or the alleged attack on the Conscience in May 2025. Greta Thunberg's presence would make such an incident politically explosive, but not necessarily prevent escalation. The third and least likely scenario, successful passage to Gaza. Should the Madleen reach the Palestinian coast, it would be the first flotilla since 2008 to do so. A major symbolic success for the international solidarity movement. Part 31, guaranteed media impact. Whatever the scenario, the media impact will be considerable. Greta Thunberg's presence guarantees worldwide coverage. Every hour of navigation is broadcast live on social networks, followed by millions of people. We have already won, says Ehab Latayef from Canada. The mere fact that Greta is sailing to Gaza puts the Palestinian question back at the center of the international agenda. That is exactly our goal. This media dimension is crucial to understanding the evolution of flotillas. Less important in terms of humanitarian aid, 12 people can only carry a few tons of supplies. They have become tools of massive political communication. Part 32. A generation that will not shut up. Beyond the geopolitical stakes, the Madleen's mission reveals something deeper. The emergence of a new generation of activists who refuse to compromise with their elders. Part 33. The refusal of neutrality. Our generation has grown up with the internet, explains Jade, a 16-year-old high school student from Marseille who is following the mission live. We see the images from Gaza in real time. We cannot pretend we do not know. Our parents could claim ignorance, but we cannot. This generation, born after 2000, has a different approach to international conflicts. Less influenced by the Cold War and its legacies, it analyzes the world through new lenses: the fight against oppression, climate justice, universal human rights. Greta shows us that we can be consistent, continues Jade. If we fight against the destruction of the planet, we must also fight against the destruction of the Palestinians. It is the same system of domination. Part 34. Digital internationalism. Social networks have created an unprecedented form of internationalism. Teenagers in Stockholm can follow the daily lives of their counterparts in Gaza live, creating bonds of empathy impossible in the past. This digital empathy is transforming the way we approach conflicts. Before, Palestine was a distant cause for us Europeans, says French MEP Raphael Glucksmann. Today, it is a daily drama that we experience live on our phones. Part 35. Conclusion: beyond the horizon. As the Madleen continues its journey towards the Palestinian horizon, it carries with it much more than 12 activists and a few tons of humanitarian aid. He symbolizes a generation that refuses indifference, a world that is rebuilding around new solidarities, an era when information circulates faster than diplomacy. The story of the Freedom Flotilla. 2025 speaks to us of our times, the fractures of the West, the emergence of the global South, the power of social networks, the limits of international law, and above all, the awakening of a youth that no longer wants to inherit an unjust world. Whether or not the Madleen reaches the Gaza coast, it will have already made history. It will have shown that at a time when governments are struggling to act, international civil society is taking up the baton. It will have proved that hope can take the form of a small boat sailing towards the impossible. We are doing this because, no matter what the odds are against us, we have to keep trying, Greta Thunberg had said on leaving Sicily. Because the moment we stop trying is the moment we lose our humanity. In an increasingly divided world, this shared humanity may well be our last common compass. And perhaps that, in the end, is Madleen's real victory. To remind us that we all belong to the same humanity, and that no blockade can ever prevent it from sailing towards justice.